All right, we're glad to be with you this evening for another session of the Bible Talk. I'm glad to have Brother Dwight McComb here, and I've asked him to come and help with this for his particular expertise as a physician, because this lesson is going to be about diseases in the Bible. And we're just going to enjoy talking about this and trying to determine what this might have been. And I want to say beforehand, you know, and I say this in front of and to Dwight, and I think that you would know this, that the study of medicine, I studied really hard today on this stuff myself. When I picked this, I picked it for that reason, to have a physician. I'm thankful to have Dwight. But then I did not realize how much I bit off till I started chewing a little bit. But now the study of medicine is no doubt very difficult, and Dwight can speak to this. It's very demanding. It is very time consuming. And certainly it requires a great deal of intellect, but it is really, really very interesting. You want to say anything before we begin about that?
Yeah,
you know it.
This is an interesting topic, probably more interesting to me maybe than some others, but you know, I'll throw some tidbits in there as we go through there, and a lot of what I'll say is conjecture, because we don't really know for certain on some things, and you know, we're seeing what's here through the eyes to some degree of the writers who probably didn't know a lot about medicine, and how they were inspired doesn't necessarily translate to medical accuracy, but there's some interesting things to get out of the points you wanted to bring up, and we'll do our best to see what we can discover.
Well, if it's all right, you want to read some of the verses, and I'll read some, and then we'll just discuss them a little bit.
Sure.
We're going to, first of all, we're going to talk about barrenness, and that's in Genesis 16 and verse 1. And we definitely associate barrenness with people not having children. Some people don't have children for different reasons, but this is about someone who was barren, and obviously there was some reason there that would have to do with medical reasons. All right? You want to read that one, Dwight?
Sure. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar.
All right? The first thing, she's barren. I did not really realize this, but it didn't surprise me. I had some idea about this, but in the ancient world, barrenness was considered a very terrible curse. And even though we don't read this in the Bible, nowhere in the Bible it says anything about have to have children or to be saved or anything like that. It is, I think we can understand that people have always wanted to have children. Most people, not everybody. There's some people who don't have children. And if some people had children, they shouldn't have had children, I don't believe, in my humble estimation, because they didn't do a very good job with them. But in the old world, this was considered a curse. In Exodus chapter 22, I'm going to get 23 verse 26. If you get Deuteronomy 7:14, I want you to see what this says about this before we mention more. In Exodus 23 verse 26 and Deuteronomy 7 and verse 14, I'll get there in a minute. I should have been turning to it already. All right, this is what the Lord had Moses to pen, and he did also have him to say this. Exodus 23 and verse, get my right verse here. I can't turn these little fine India, whatever kind of paper you call this stuff, paper. Now, verse 26 says this: no one shall suffer miscarriage or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. Now that's the promise that God made to the children of Israel if they were faithful to Him. And if you go ahead and look at what it says there in Deuteronomy.
This is right after the Ten Commandments were given. It says, you shall be blessed above all peoples. There shall not be male or female barren among you or among your livestock.
A great blessing. You know, barrenness, if you wouldn't go with barrenness very long, you're going to have real trouble. A family, a country, a nation. Isaiah, we're not going to read this, but Isaiah 54 is a great song where God, through Isaiah, told the children of Israel, now you straighten up. They were experiencing this. Barrenness among their wives and their animals, miscarriaging and things like that. He said, you straighten up and I will restore those who have been rejected. Now, you would know more about this than I do. Barrenness it could be some kind of physical problem, right? Is that?
Certainly. There have been times across the course of history where the blame was always placed on the female, but obviously it can, be something involved with the male. Clearly here, it was Sarah's problem because Hagar had quickly bore a child with Ishmael through Abraham. But from a female perspective, you can have different physical problems. You can have problems with ovulation, mechanical problems with the fallopian tubes, with the uterus. You can have irregularities in the whole ovarian and menstrual cycle. Infections can cause problems, and then as we went along, age became a problem. It said when she did finally conceive, she was already past the way of women, where she wasn't even having menstrual cycles anymore. But
definitely a miracle, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Mental stress, physical stress, things like that.
Sterility
can cause that. So.
Well, now I don't know where this came from, but I know this is a true thing, and I think it's true in every society. People got the idea, and they had it here, even though this is not in the Bible, but if a man did not have a male descendant, then when the last male in his family died, his family was just, they were obsolete. They were no more. They were annihilated. And that's not in the Bible. But I guarantee you ask a lot of men today, or men when they want to have children, and if you ask the average man out here, well, what do you want to have? I don't know what percentage, but I said real high percentage, he wants to have a little boy. I always thought at first, I thought several things about having children were very wrong. I remember one day, a bunch of us boys about 16 were sitting around talking, how many children do you want to have when you get married? I think I popped out 6. Hadn't even talked to a woman or a wife or anything. 6? Hadn't thought about the money or anything like that. And, I
thought I wanted to have a boy until I had a girl. And then when the boy came along, I thought, well, now what am I supposed to do with that?
Well, I tell you what my deal was. I wasn't worried about being annihilated, but when time got real close, I just wanted everything to be all right for my wife and the child. That's all that mattered. That's all that mattered. But I tell you, there's something about that. There's a lot of these Hancocks around here that we're all from the same family. They're programmed for boys. But my sister had 2 girls, my brother had 2 girls, I had 2 girls. Now, some of the other, my daddy's sisters, one of his sisters only had a daughter, and the other 2 did have a boy and a girl. But anyway, that's not true, but barrenness was a serious disease, not disease, it was a serious situation in the Bible for a lot of people. All right, what about boils? Now, this is very interesting. Boils. In Exodus chapter 9 and verse 9, if you want to get that one, I'll get 2 Kings, and so we'll read it, and let's talk about what it is here just a minute. If you go ahead and read it.
Exodus 9, verse 9. It shall become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and become boils, breaking out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. So this is the 6th plague for the Israelites trying to escape Egypt. And God gave them the plague of boils. So from a medical standpoint, boils imply some type of infection usually, especially today, and we assume it did then. They can be superficial or deep. You can have boils on the skin surface, which are typically not life-threatening. They're painful, they're sore, they can be unattractive and problematic, but not necessarily life-threatening. They can become life-threatening if they get into deeper tissues, can get into the bloodstream. It's often a staph infection, so if that gets into the bloodstream, especially back at this time where you had no antibiotics, they can become deadly. So
it is an inflammation too, right?
Yeah, the infection causes inflammation. There are things that we see that we call a boil and it turns out not to be infectious, but most of them are. We Abscess is another word we use nowadays for a boil. You can have small superficial abscesses or really deep ones in internal organs and stuff like that. So,
have you ever heard the term chilblains? That's an old word for boil. Have you ever heard that one by chance? Chilblains.
I have. We use it now.
Swelling sore.
It has a connotation kind of in modern medicine of something that happens on the fingertips or the hands, where you get a discoloration and inflammation that's caused by
cold or too much heat or cold.
Some clots in small blood vessels and stuff like that. Yeah. So.
All right. Carbuncle is another term.
Yep.
You mentioned abscess.
Carbuncle is a larger abscess,
tissue, right?
Deep tissue. A furuncle is something smaller and more superficial in the medical terminology. Yeah.
So the carbuncle, it does, as you said, it's deep tissue with openings for discharge. A lot of times, right?
Yeah, it may have one or more places where you have pus draining from it. Yeah.
Now, 2 Kings. This is interesting, and see what you think about this. 2 Kings 20 and verse 7, this has to do with Hezekiah.
Mm-hmm.
Then Isaiah said, now if you go back up and read, Hezekiah's sick, he thinks he's going to die, and God extends his life 15 years. But the treatment is what's interesting. Then Isaiah said, now of course where did Isaiah get this? He got this from God. Now of course this is obviously a miracle. He said, take a lump of figs. So they took and laid it on the boil, and he recovered. It took him 3 days to recover. But the lump of figs, they made a poultice, and where they took a bunch. I don't know if they mashed the figs up or what. They put them on a cloth, and I guess heated it and put it on the sore. But this took 3 days for him to get over it. Now, I wonder, as a physician, of course you wouldn't treat anybody with figs, I don't think.
Yeah, I've debated about that very verse as to whether
you talk to us about that then.
Well, two things. First, I think obviously since he apparently was going to die without God's intervention, he had some sort of serious boil. It was probably one of those carbuncles, deep abscesses, blood infection, something more than likely. And then the second thing is, the figs. What was it about the figs? And I wasn't aware really of any, medical uses of figs as far as topically. Internally they're healthy. They're good to eat. And I didn't really find anything really convincing. So, and you may have some insight, something you ran across. But so I'm not sure that there was anything inherently good about the figs any more than the Jordan River for Naaman or the mud that Jesus put on the eyes of the blind man. It may have just been the tool that God chose. But it's interesting. It would be neat if there was some inherent property, but I'm not really aware of any.
Now, I did find that was the common treatment for boils at that day and time now. But like you say, I don't know, was it a common treatment that worked, or they tried it didn't work? But I want to ask you this. Would the boil, the bad thing, impetigo, am I saying it right?
Mm-hmm.
I knew a young fellow when I was about 10 years old who had it, and it was terrible. And they had, I don't know, I understood they had to mash those things every day, and they had them all over. Couldn't go swimming with us because it was very contagious. And you've heard of impetigo. Is that anything kin to this, or is that
It can be
impetigo?
impetigo. It's an infection. It's common in kids. It's usually either staph or strep that causes it. Can be either one, and it causes little crusty, like honey crusted, draining little sores, all over. It can get on the face, other places. It's pretty contagious. It's easily treated nowadays. Well, you can knock it out in a couple of days with the right antibiotics, but obviously back then you didn't have that option.
Pretty painful too, wouldn't it? Especially
it's uncomfortable, unpleasant, absolutely.
All right, well, we'll move on to the next one. The itch. I thought this was a very interesting. I'll go back and let you think about it if you want to. I'm going to go to Deuteronomy 28:28, and this is something that God put on them. And I do not believe that they did not have a cure for this in the Bible days, the ancient days. But in Deuteronomy, I cannot turn these pages, y'all. I don't know. Somebody must have taken my.
You want me to read it?
Go ahead.
Okay, Mark 28, Deuteronomy 28:27. The Lord will strike you with the boils of Egypt and with tumors and scabs and itch of which you cannot be healed.
All right. Now, what I read, and I'm sure you've had to do a lot of this, wound care. I don't know if you ever dealt with this. Maybe scabies, maybe, caused by a tiny insect, which we still got the little insects nowadays. That could be, insects could be associated with spiders that burrow under the skin, intense itching. And by the way, mite, chickens. I just happen to know this about chickens. You know, chickens, the way the chicken takes a bath, it dusts itself. It gets in dust somewhere, it gets that dust. It's amazing. A white chicken can get in the dust, a white leghorn, get that dust all over them, all in their feathers. They get up and shake off and just lily pretty white. Isn't that amazing? But the reason they do that is to get rid of the mites. Now, but I read there, so it might have to do with that. And the other lasting thing, infection is spread by very close contact, and the ancients knew no care. So what would you say about the itch? I don't think he was talking about poison ivy.
I scratched myself. I think scabies is probably the most likely thing. It's contagious. You can spread it from person to person. It's caused by a little tiny mite. It's the female mite. She burrows under the skin surface and lays eggs, and it causes this intense reaction. Your body's reacting towards the mite, towards the chemical she uses to make the hole toward the eggs, and you get this inflammatory response. And you can have sort of the classic scabies. It's pretty mild, and you don't have a lot of little places, but you can get what's called crusted scabies, which is where you may have millions of mites. It's more common in people who have, other medical conditions, skin conditions, that kind of stuff, and it can be just devastating. And again, you didn't have any. Now there are treatments for it. Back then, you didn't really have that, and it can last, especially if you get the crusted kind. It can last weeks, months, and years, and involve whole families and that kind of thing.
Is this two things I want to ask you? Is this like, is a bed bug in this? Is that a different situation?
The bed bug, the scabies mite burrows into the skin. The bed bug just comes out of the dark, bites you, feeds on the blood, and then goes back and hides again. But your body reacts to the saliva from the bed bug. It causes this inflammatory, rash type deal. So, but they itch. So
it would be a very bad.
If you had an infestation of bed bugs in the whole population, they would all have a rash. They would be scratching and itching, and they're almost impossible to get rid of. So yeah, that's a possibility.
Well, let me ask you this, Dwight. Would this have anything to do with whether or not people were clean? We don't have to be clean to go to heaven physically, but we do have to be clean spiritually. But would cleanliness have anything to do with the scabies or not? Not necessarily?
Not necessarily. It's
just unfortunate it happens.
Just unfortunate. People who don't pay attention to hygiene, I guess maybe they're less likely to get treatment, especially nowadays, and get it cured. But it can happen to anybody.
And certainly, though, in a more agricultural society, like they would have been back then, this would be more likely to occur when people are out on the land and in the woods and stuff like that. And maybe then, like city dwellers that maybe not. I'm not saying they couldn't get it, I don't mean that, but they might not be as likely. Is that right?
Sure, yeah. He could have dropped a billion chickens out of the sky to speak in Mississippi terms, I guess. I don't know.
That's right. Okay. Well, now, what about, I thought this was very interesting. Deuteronomy 28, verse 28, lunacy. And I looked this up, tried to study this, because this is very interesting. Now, there's a possibility that epilepsy could be involved here. Mm-hmm. Madness is another word that's used in the Bible for more often than not for lunacy. Madness. I thought it was interesting to read mental blindness. Mental blindness, confusion. I just inserted this. I think this would kind of go along with what old people used to say. He can't think straight for some reason. And things that some of the ancient writers said about this: stress, anxiety, mental incompetence, nervous exhaustion, which they refer to as neurasthenia, that all of this stuff was associated with that. And even I want you to comment on that, and I'd like you to comment on Proverbs 17:22 if you can, if you have anything said about that, about But go ahead and talk about this, and I'll get you on that in a minute, see what you think about it. I didn't find anything deep about this.
Well, you know, you mentioned lunacy. Madness, like you said, that's the word that's used the most. The word lunatic is used twice in the King James Version in the Bible, both times in Matthew, and both times referring to somebody who has what sounds like a seizure disorder. The word for lunacy and lunatic comes from the Greek word for moon, luna, and they believe that the cycles of the moon may affect people's seizures or that kind of thing. So there's a lot of overlap between just mental illness, seizure disorder. Nobody really understood what was what and how to sort those out. There are a lot of cases, we don't really have that in the Bible that I'm aware of, but back in ancient times, they used to do something called trepanning, where they would bore a hole in the skull to let the evil spirits out, or that kind of thing. They found graves with people who had holes in their head, in evidence that they healed or were trying to heal. So it was people who survived it. And
this is from societies like Grecian and Roman.
This was from quote civilized
people.
societies, but the thought was if you had a seizure, if you were mentally ill or whatever, it's probably an evil spirit, and they would bore holes to try to release those. It's hard to sort out what's what. Some times in the Bible, clearly madness and seizures. Other times, and in the Bible, sometimes it is evil spirits. I mean, Saul God allowed an evil spirit to
the man of the
occupy him. Yeah, that's right. That's right. In the New Testament, he clearly had legion evil spirits in him, making him behave with the way that he did. So,
but it would be a very serious and a very hard thing. And if you had a society or a city or whatever, where there was a whole lot of this, it would be very, very hard on those folks, wouldn't it? What do you think about, now here's the reason I'll read this here, and I'll tell you why. Proverbs 17:22, a merry heart does good like medicine. And of course, I think that would hint at anxiety problems and mental exhaustion, stress. But then the latter part's but a broken spirit dries the bones. In reading about the lunacy, some of the ancient writers said that this could even cause some such things as arthritis. Would you like to comment on that, or if you want to
say that again?
This might have something to do with the causes of arthritis. Now, I understand, I think, but arthritis is it's a bacteria or something in it, or
it's an inflammatory. There's different types. You can have inflammatory arthritis, where the body sort of attacks the lining of the joints, or you can have what I call, to tell my patients, the wear and tear arthritis, which is just from a lifetime of doing whatever and pounding it and repetitive trauma. But
that first one, rheumatoid arthritis, is that caused by what?
That's an inflammatory arthritis where your body attacks itself, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, what do you have any comments you want to make about that? About a broken spirit?
Now there are some inflammatory conditions like lupus and some things like that where you get this full body inflammation that can cause rashes, arthritis. You can get what's called cerebritis, which is inflammation of the brain, which makes you have trouble. I mean, it causes mental health problems, difficulty thinking clearly, and that kind of thing. So there's potential link there. That Proverbs verse. It's one of my favorites. I mean, I think the Bible clearly teaches there's a certain degree of you can choose what type of mood you want to be in and how you want to approach things and what lens you want to see things through to some degree. Now that doesn't discount. I mean, there are people who have mental illness that are just, they have an illness and they can't help it, just like people can't help having diabetes. Or cancer or whatever, but there are things you can do to kind of cope with things and smiling and choosing to be happy. You wake up and say, all right, I'm going to have a good day today. That sort of sets the tone. And if you wake up and say, I'm going to be miserable today, you probably are going to be miserable today. So
I appreciate my dad. He was always wanting to be optimistic, always optimistic, no pessimism. And I can't tell you how many times I heard the verse, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And now as I'm grown, I pray, or I'm thinking right now, I pray for the Lord to help me have a good attitude. And I think I can personally attest to this fact that it does work. Because I think sometimes when I don't, I don't. But as you use that word link, but evidently there's some kind of link then, possibly a link to lunacy and maybe even some other number of, well, I think that is a fact that lunacy does cause other physical
It
problems.
was such a broad term that I'm sure it
Right.
encompassed a lot of different, conditions.
All right, the next one, tumors. In 1 Samuel 5 and verse 6. And of course, if you just look up in a dictionary, just a regular dictionary, I don't know if it would be that much different from the medical, a mass of tissue. I wonder in this reading, you read as you read, would you think this might have anything to do with the bubonic plague or anything like that? But you want to read that and comment on
Yes,
that.
1 Samuel 5:6, the hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. The King James version used the word hemorrhoids instead of tumors, which means hemorrhoids. And for a long time, that's kind of the way this was interpreted. But I personally think it was probably bubonic plague. Like you said, the word tumor, it means soft tissue swelling. The Septuagint added that the tumors were in the groin area, which you think, well, maybe that's hemorrhoids. I think that's kind of a common reason why people thought that's probably what it was. But actually, in the groin areas where you have lymph nodes that are commonly swollen, soft tissue swelling in people who have bubonic plague. If you look over in chapter 6, they talk about being ravaged by mice. Bubonic plague is caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis that fleas have, and when humans are just sort of incidental hosts. They're not supposed to be infected by bubonic plague. They just get caught in the turmoil. They're not part of the normal life cycle. But you get a flea that is on a rat or a mouse or some other animal that bites a human, and then they get this infection, and you get these big swollen lymph nodes that turn colors, and it's called, it's a bubo. Which is a swelling, a tumor, and that's probably what this was. There were episodes of plague over, all that part of the world for centuries.
And that does, would you think that did have something to do with cleanliness and hygiene? This is at least keeping your, not so much just your personal body. I guess you start to use hygiene in this broad sense, but I mean your surroundings. You don't want your house, tough surroundings. Man, I've been fighting mice in my chicken feed out there. I have killed about 10. Hate to kill anything, but the best way I have found to get them, they chew holes in plastic trash cans. They'll chew a hole and it's hard to bleed. And they'll get in there. But so I've got one that's just got about that much feed in it. They get in, they can't get out. And I come in, I bring the cat, and I knock them loony. I knock them lunatic to start with, and then the cat sometimes kills them and plays with them. But I don't like that. I don't like the little rat pellets. Yeah. And when I find them, throw it out on the ground, I don't want to feed the chickens. I think, well, if a chicken doesn't have a stomach, but if they eat that pellet with the food, I wouldn't think that'd be good. But anyway, you talk about
I think as far as if you're dwelling where your habitation has rats running around or and that kind of thing, then you're a lot more likely to be bitten by a flea that's on a rat. And so there's and people just didn't understand that. That's in the Middle Ages, they didn't understand personal hygiene. They didn't understand how to be clean, how to handle their waste, and all these kind of things. And so they sort of intermingled with rats and other animals more than they should, and it cost millions and millions of lives.
I'm sure because my mother, she understood it. I wanted a hamster so bad growing up, and she said, "You're not bringing me a rat in this house." But anyway, now we wouldn't want to confuse this, right? You speak to this when we talk about a tumor. a tumor, I suppose, is a tumor, but this is not the same thing as a lot of the malignancies people are experiencing today, right?
Yeah, now tumor is Latin for soft tissue
Right.
swelling. I mean, we could speak in medical terms. Rubor is redness, and tumor is swelling, and calor is heat, and that, is a Latin term that just means soft tissue swelling. We've taken it to mean, a lot of people, a cancer basically, because a cancer is a type of tumor because it's a growth, but there are plenty of benign tumors and plenty of soft tissue swellings from the Latin sense that have nothing to do with any kind of
So I wouldn't want people to think we're saying the reason they might have a, it's because they're clean. I didn't want to give people the wrong idea.
Yeah, no, we're
We're glad
talking
you
about
straightened that out.
totally different things.
You straighten that out. But now, as you talked about emrods, they talk about an emrod as a type of boil too. But that, I think it's right what you said too, that this was not the thing that we read about here in 1 Samuel. I think it was, the way it sounds, it was the plague, that bubonic plague. Okay,
It's interesting that they made the link here in the Bible. To me, there's a link there between this and the mice, because nobody understood that link until late in the 19th century was when they figured out what the bacteria was, that it came from the fleas that bit the rats. This was thousands of years ahead of time, and here's the link right here, and people didn't appreciate it till a long time later.
And if I'm not mistaken, it came to Europe by way of merchants who'd gone to the Far East, Middle East, Far East.
Probably so.
And when they came back, they brought back the mice, rats had the fleas. Okay.
That does it for part 1 of Bible Talk this week. Tune in to part 2 to see the conclusion of this discussion about diseases in the Bible.